The town square was always full of noise in the afternoon. Children ran around the fountain. Shopkeepers talked to their customers, and travelers stopped to rest on the benches. In the center of it all stood an old wooden piano, its paint chipped from years of sunlight and rain. Most people hardly noticed it anymore, except for one man who visited the square almost every day. He often walked with slow steps, as if each foot carried the weight of a long story no one had asked to hear. His clothes were not fancy, but they were clean. His hair was messy, yet his eyes held something gentle, a softness that many chose to ignore. People whispered when he passed by. Some claimed he wasn't fully aware of what he was doing. Others said he talked to himself, which made them uncomfortable. He never argued with their assumptions. He simply lowered his head and sat on the edge of the bench near the piano. Some days he didn't touch the keys at all. He just stared at them, running his fingers lightly over the surface as if remembering a tune only he could hear. Whenever someone came near the piano, he quietly stepped away. He didn't like being watched. The more people stared, the more he withdrew into himself. The rumors grew because nobody cared to ask why he behaved the way he did. It was easier for them to label him, whisper about him, and keep him at a distance. One sunny afternoon, the square was unusually crowded. A group of students had gathered after school, laughing loudly as they passed by the piano. They noticed him sitting on the bench, looking at the keys with a lost expression on his face. One of the students nudged another and pointed at him. "Look, he's doing it again," one said. "He thinks he's some kind of musician," another added with a laugh. They didn't say these things quietly. They wanted him to hear, and he did. His shoulders stiffened. He tried to ignore the voices, but their laughter sank deep into him. He touched one key softly, producing a faint sound, but the moment he did, the group laughed even louder. "See, he's just pressing random notes." He gently took his hands off the piano. He didn't look at them. He didn't look at anyone. Instead, he rose from the bench and walked a few steps back, putting distance between himself and the instrument. The students moved on, still giggling among themselves. People passing by shook their heads. Some felt uneasy seeing him there. Others thought he should find somewhere else to wander. No one stopped to consider why he was drawn to the piano every day. To them, he was simply an odd figure in the square. As the crowd thinned, he sat down again, but farther from the piano this time. His eyes stayed fixed on it as if it called to him. It looked like he wanted to play, but something held him back. Fear, shame, memories. Maybe all of those things mixed into one. Another person nearby watched him more carefully than the rest. She owned a small shop across the square and had been observing him for months. Unlike others, she didn't see someone strange. She noticed how his fingers hovered above the keys with a kind of familiarity. She noticed how his eyes softened whenever he looked at the piano. She had seen enough musicians in her life to recognize when someone understood the instrument, even if he didn't play. The way he touched the piano told a story. He wasn't just wandering. He wasn't pretending. Something about the piano mattered to him. One day, earlier that week, she had seen him come before sunrise. No one else was around. The streets were quiet, and the square felt different without the noise of the day. He sat down at the piano and played only a few gentle notes. They were soft, like someone testing the air around them. The notes were not random. They flowed together with care. Before he could continue, a street cleaner arrived, and the man stopped instantly. He stepped away from the piano, refusing even to look at it again. It was as if any pair of eyes watching him made him shrink back into silence. What the shop owner saw that day stayed in her mind. She knew there was more to his story than the town believed, but she also knew he would never tell it to anyone who treated him the way most people did. On that sunny afternoon, with the students' laughter still echoing in the square, the man walked toward the fountain. He sat on the stone edge, dipped his fingers in the cool water, and stared at his reflection. He looked tired, not physically, but tired in a way that came from carrying too much inside. A couple walked by, whispering to each other as they pointed at him. He heard them, but he didn't respond. He had grown used to the whispers. They hurt, but the hurt was familiar now. He took a deep breath and glanced back at the piano again. The sunlight reflected off its wooden surface. Dust floated in the air, and a soft breeze made the old music sheets on top flutter slightly. For a moment, the square fell quiet. It was the kind of silence that felt like the world paused, waiting for something to happen. He stood up and walked slowly toward the piano again. There was no crowd now, just a few people passing by. He sat down, placed his fingers on the keys, and closed his eyes. He didn't press a single note this time. He just breathed. He wanted to play. It was clear in the way his hands shaped themselves naturally over the keys, as if they remembered paths they once knew well. But fear held him still. A child walked by, holding an ice cream cone, and stopped to watch him. Unlike the adults, the child wasn't judging. He was curious. The man opened his eyes and noticed the little boy staring at him. For a second, he almost smiled, but then the boy's mother hurried over, took the child by the hand, and pulled him away. "Don't get too close," she whispered. The man's face fell. His shoulders sank. Once again, he removed his hands from the piano. The shop owner across the square felt her heart tighten at the sight. She wanted to walk over and say something kind, something encouraging, but she hesitated. Would he trust her? Would he think she was just another person trying to judge him? As the sun began to lower in the sky, the man stood up once more. He walked to a quiet corner of the square, taking one last look at the piano before he left. His steps were slow, almost reluctant, as if part of him belonged to that piano and didn't want to walk away. People continued their routines without giving him much thought, but the shop owner watched him disappear down the street. She knew that behind his silence, there was a story waiting to be uncovered, a story that the town had ignored for far too long. That evening, as she closed her shop, she looked at the empty square and the lonely piano sitting in the center. She wondered who the man used to be before life pushed him into the shadows. She wondered what kind of music he once played, and what moments shaped the pain she saw in his eyes. Something told her his story wasn't over, and somewhere inside him, a melody still waited to be heard. The next morning, the sky was still gray when the shop owner stepped outside to open her store. The air felt cool, and the town square was quiet, the way it always was before the day truly began. She carried a small tray of items she planned to range near the entrance, but her eyes drifted toward the old piano in the center of the square dot as she expected. He was there again. He sat on the same bench as always, his hands resting on his knees, his head slightly tilted as he watched the piano from a distance. He didn't touch it this time. He only looked at it the way someone might look at something they loved, but felt unworthy of approaching. She stood still for a moment, watching him the way she had for months. She had seen the way people treated him. She had heard the whispers, the laughter, the casual cruelty that came so easily to people who didn't understand. But she also noticed what others didn't, the way his fingers moved in the air sometimes, as if playing an invisible tune only he could hear. She wondered again about his story, about what happened to him before he became the silent man of the square. She placed the tray down and adjusted a few items on the front table, but her mind was still on him. A part of her wanted to approach him, even if just to say hello, but she didn't want to startle him, and she didn't want to push too hard. She wanted to give him a chance to trust her, not scare him further away. As the sun slowly rose, more people began walking through the square. A few glanced at the man on the bench and then quickly looked away. Others whispered to each other as they passed. The shop owner felt a familiar heaviness in her chest at the sight. The man kept his eyes down, pretending not to notice. Late in the morning, when the square grew busier, he stood up and walked closer to the piano. The shop owner noticed his hesitation with every step. He looked around, checking to see if anyone was watching him. When he thought no one was paying attention, he reached out and touched the edge of the piano. His fingers slowly slid across the wood, feeling the tiny cracks and chips in the old paint. He leaned in slightly, almost as if he were greeting an old friend. Then he lifted the piano lid. He pressed one key, very softly. The sound was faint, but it echoed just enough to catch the shop owner's attention. She peeked around the corner of her shop, watching quietly. He played one more note, then another. Each note seemed to wake something inside him. His shoulders relaxed a little. His eyes softened, shifting from fear to focus. He leaned forward and played a few slow chords, simple ones at first, like he was warming up. It wasn't much, only a handful of notes, but the way he played them proved he wasn't just someone randomly touching keys. He had training, he had memory, he had experience. But then, a loud sound broke the fragile moment. A delivery truck pulled into the square, its engine rumbling loudly. The man instantly froze, his hands snapping away from the keys as if he had been burned. He stepped back fast, nearly stumbling. People turned to look, not because of him, but because of the truck. Yet the man thought all eyes were suddenly on him. He backed up even more, panic rising in his expression. He closed the piano lid quickly and moved away. Within seconds, he was back on the bench, staring at the ground, breathing unevenly. The shop owner's heart ached watching him. She decided that morning that she wouldn't let another day pass without at least saying something to him, but she would wait for the right moment. Round noon, the square grew lively again. A musician with a guitar sat up near the fountain and started playing cheerful tunes. People stopped to listen. Children danced. The atmosphere lightened. The man watched from his bench. He listened quietly, his head lowered, but his foot tapping ever so slightly to the rhythm. Music still lived inside him. The shop owner noticed the small movements. He made tiny steps toward a world he had once belonged to. When the guitar player paused for a break, he placed his guitar against the fountain and walked away. A few children ran up to it, pretending to strum the strings. Their laughter filled the square. The man looked away, but he couldn't hide the sadness in his eyes. The shop owner finally stepped out of her shop and walked toward him. She felt her hands grow slightly shaky. She hadn't spoken to him before, not directly. She didn't want to frighten him, but she felt this was the right time. She stopped a few steps away and gently said, "Good afternoon." The man looked up, startled. His eyes darted around, unsure whether she was talking to him or someone behind him. She gave a small smile. "I've seen you here often." He blinked and lowered his head again. It was clear he wasn't used to people approaching him kindly. She took a slow breath and continued, keeping her voice calm and soft. "I hope you don't mind me saying this, but the way you touch the piano, it looks like you know it very well." He didn't respond immediately. His hands fidgeted in his lap. He glanced at the piano and then at the ground. "I used to play," he said quietly, almost whispering. The shop owner's breath caught. It was the first time she had heard him speak. "You played professionally?" she asked gently. He hesitated. Long ago, when he spoke those words, his voice cracked slightly. As if the memories behind them were heavy, she sat down beside him, leaving enough space so he wouldn't feel crowded. She didn't push him for more details. She just let the silence settle between them. A few minutes passed before he spoke again. "I lost everything," he said softly. "Family, job, all of it." She listened without interrupting. "I couldn't handle things anymore," he continued. "My mind, it just couldn't keep up. I stopped playing. I stopped talking. I started walking around because I didn't know where else to be." He rubbed his hands together anxiously. "People stopped looking at me the way they used to," he said. "They started avoiding me. They thought I was strange." His voice grew smaller. "I guess I became what they said I was." The shop owner felt her eyes grow warm, not from pity, but from the weight of his honesty. "You're not what they say," she said quietly. He kept staring at his hands. "You're someone who loves music," she added, "and someone who hasn't forgotten how to feel it." He looked up at her, confusion in his eyes. He seemed unsure whether to believe her. She smiled gently. "I've heard you play. Early one morning, you probably thought no one was around, but I was unlocking my shop." His mouth parted slightly in surprise. "You have real talent," she continued. "You're not pretending. You're not lost. You just need someone who sees you." He didn't know how to respond to that. His eyes glistened, as if the simple act of being recognized was something he hadn't felt in a long time. A long silence stretched between them, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It felt like a small bridge forming. Finally, the shop owner said, "Would you maybe play again sometime? When you feel ready?" He shook his head quickly. "People laugh. They always laugh. They won't when they hear you," she said. He didn't answer. Fear still held him tightly, but she could see a tiny spark in him, something that hadn't been there before. She stood up and gave him a small nod. "I'll be right there," she said, pointing to her shop. "If you ever need anything." He watched her walk away, unsure what to think. For the rest of the afternoon, he stayed on the bench, staring at the piano with a different look, one that held both fear and hope. As the sun began to set, he stood up and touched the piano again, just lightly, just enough to feel it. Something inside him shifted. He didn't know it yet, but this was the beginning of a change he never expected. The morning sky was covered in heavy clouds, the kind that warned of rain long before the first drop fell. The town square felt colder than usual, and most people hurried along, hoping to reach their shops and offices before the weather turned. But despite the chill, he was there again, sitting on the same worn bench near the old piano. He held his hands close together, rubbing them slowly for warmth. His eyes stayed fixed on the piano, but he kept a safe distance, the memory of the previous day still making him nervous. His talk with the shop owner had stayed with him all night. Her gentle voice, the kindness in her words, the way she didn't look at him like everyone else did, it lingered in his mind. Part of him felt lighter, almost as if someone had lifted a layer of heaviness off his shoulders. But another part of him was afraid. He hadn't opened up to anyone in years. Trusting someone felt unfamiliar, almost dangerous. The shop owner stepped out of her store with a broom in hand. She noticed him right away. Her expression softened, and she gave him a small nod. He hesitated for a moment before nodding back. It wasn't much, but it was more acknowledgement than he'd shared with anyone in a long time. Slowly, the square grew busier. People rushed through, trying to beat the rain. A few looked at him the same way they always did, with caution or indifference. But today, something felt different for him. The shop owner's words had planted a small seed in his heart. He was still afraid, but he wasn't entirely closed off anymore. When the first drop of rain fell, it landed on the lid of the piano. He watched it slide down the wood, leaving a thin trail. Then another drop, and another. Soon, the rain began to fall harder. Most people rushed into nearby shops, pulling jackets over their heads. The shop owner hurried outside to pull her display items back into the store. She glanced toward him, worried he might not find shelter. But instead of running from the rain, he walked toward the piano. He lifted the lid slightly, shielding the keys from the water. His movements were gentle, protective, as if the piano were something fragile. The shop owner noticed and grabbed an umbrella. She hurried across the square and held it above him. "You'll get wet," she said. He looked up at her, rain dripping from his hair. The piano shouldn't. His voice was tired but sincere. It was clear the instrument meant something deep to him, something he hadn't talked about yet. She held the umbrella steady without saying anything else. Together, they listened to the sound of rain tapping against the umbrella and falling onto the square. After a few minutes, the rain slowed down and finally stopped. The clouds stayed thick, but the worst had passed. He stepped back from the piano, letting the shop owner close the umbrella. "Thank you," he said quietly. She smiled gently. "You didn't want the piano to get damaged." He nodded. "You really care about it, don't you?" she asked. He hesitated, then whispered, "It reminds me of my old life." She didn't ask more, but the look in her eyes encouraged him to continue. "I used to play in places much bigger than this square," he said. "Rooms full of people, bright lights, big stages." He raised his hands slightly, as if remembering the feel of polished piano keys under his fingers. "What happened?" she asked softly. His eyes dropped to the ground. "Life happened. Loss happened. And I broke in ways that music couldn't fix anymore." He leaned against the piano, his shoulders tense with the weight of memories. "I tried to go back to it," he said. "But every time I touched the keys, the past came rushing back. Then people started treating me differently. They stopped seeing me as a musician and started seeing me as someone who didn't belong anywhere." The shop owner listened with quiet patience. She didn't interrupt. She didn't try to fix anything. She simply stood there, offering presence. The man took a deep breath. "I thought if I stayed away from music long enough, the pain would fade," he said. "But it stayed. And without music, I didn't know who I was anymore." He stepped back from the piano and sat on the bench nearby. His shoulders slumped forward, as if finally telling someone the truth left him drained. The shop owner sat beside him. "You didn't lose music," she said gently. "It's still inside you. I saw it. I heard it." He shook his head weakly. "That wasn't real playing. That was just memory." "Memory is where music begins," she replied. He looked at her, unsure whether to believe her. She held his gaze with calm certainty. "Play something," she said softly. "Not for anyone. Not for the people who judged you. Play for yourself." He stared at the piano. The rain left small droplets on its wooden surface, catching the faint sunlight that broke through the clouds. "I can't," he murmured. "Not in front of them." She nodded. "I understand. But you don't have to play for them. You can play when the square is empty, early in the morning, late at night. I'm not asking you to perform. I'm asking you to remember who you were." Her words hit him harder than she realized. He closed his eyes for a moment. In the quiet space behind his eyelids, he pictured himself on a stage, a long time ago. The warm lights, the calm silence before he began, the soft grip of the piano keys beneath his fingers. Then the image faded. "I don't know if I can find that part of myself again," he whispered. "You don't have to find it," she replied. "It's already there. You just need to let it breathe." He looked down at his trembling hands. "Why are you helping me?" She paused. "Because no one helped my brother when he needed someone. People judged him too. They didn't understand him, and he stopped trying to be understood." Her voice softened. "I couldn't save him, but maybe I can help someone else feel seen before it's too late." Her honesty touched him deeper than she expected. It wasn't pity. It wasn't curiosity. It was something real. A quiet moment fell between them. The clouds finally began to break apart, letting weak sunlight spread across the square. The piano glistened faintly as the light reflected off the remaining drops. He stood up slowly. "I want to try," he said, surprising himself. The shop owner looked at him with cautious hope. "Are you sure?" He nodded once. "Not now, but maybe tonight. When it's quiet, I'll be here," she said softly. He walked toward the piano again and placed both hands gently on top of it, as if reassuring himself that it was real, that he was ready. Throughout the rest of the day, he stayed close to the piano, watching the square as people came and went. For the first time in a long while, he wasn't trying to hide from the world. He was watching it with a new kind of awareness. When evening arrived and the square emptied, he returned. The air was cool, and the sound of distant traffic faded with the hours. Streetlights cast a soft glow around the piano. The shop owner stepped out of her store, wiping her hands on a cloth. She approached him without speaking. He sat down at the piano. His hands trembled. His heart beat fast. "Just breathe," she whispered. He nodded. He took a deep breath and placed his fingers on the keys. Then he closed his eyes and played one quiet note. The sound was small, but it echoed beautifully in the empty square. Another note followed, then another. He began with a slow, simple melody, nothing like the grand pieces he used to play, but it was honest, pure, a tiny doorway back to a world he had lost. The shop owner watched, tears gathering in her eyes. She didn't clap. She didn't speak. She simply listened. When he finished, he opened his eyes slowly and looked around the empty square. For the first time in years, he felt a piece of himself return, and for the first time, he believed there might be more to come. He sat in silence long after everyone else had left the room. The sound of scattered footsteps had already faded down the hallway, but he stayed there on the little wooden bench, staring at the closed lid of the piano. It was strange how quiet a place could feel after holding so much noise just moments before. But the quiet did not bother him. He had lived inside silence for most of his life, and somehow, he had learned to make peace with it. The room still carried the faint echo of his last hesitant note. He could almost feel it floating in the air, as if it had been waiting for permission to rest. He lowered his gaze and brushed the dust off the edge of the piano, taking a slow breath. His hands were still shaking, not from fear, but from something that felt like a mix of sadness and relief. Earlier, when he had tried to explain that he wanted to play, people looked at him the same way they always did, like he was strange, unpredictable, someone best avoided. The whispers, the side glances, the way parents pulled their children a little closer, it all returned in flashes. He wished he could forget. He didn't blame them. Some stories grow louder than truth, and once people believe them, they become almost impossible to erase. He opened the piano lid again, even though no one was there to listen. The keys were old and slightly yellowed, but they felt familiar and warm under his fingers. He lifted his hands and placed them gently on the keyboard, letting the cool surface calm the tremble in his fingertips. Then, without thinking too much, he played one soft chord, just one. The sound floated through the empty room like a small breath. It wasn't a performance. It wasn't to prove anything. It was simply for him. In the hallway, a faint creak echoed, but he ignored it. He knew no one would come back, not after the way the crowd had reacted earlier. They had laughed, moved away, whispered things he pretended not to hear. Some even shook their heads as if he had done something wrong just by standing near the piano. He had learned long ago to carry those reactions quietly, to let them settle somewhere deep instead of allowing them to sting. He woke before the sun, the hall still lingering in his mind like a soft echo he couldn't shake away. He lay there for a long moment, listening to the quiet of the room, feeling the slow rise and fall of his breath. It was strange, almost unsettling, to wake with a bit of peace instead of the usual heaviness. The memory of the stranger's kind words still felt fresh. Resting gently on his thoughts, he sat up, rubbed his face, and looked around the small room. Nothing had changed. The walls were still the same dull color. The window still carried a faint crack in the corner. The little table still stood uneven on one leg, but he felt different. It wasn't anything big. It was just a shift inside him, a small space where the world didn't feel entirely dark. He slowly prepared for the day, his hands steady as he washed up and put on his old jacket. It wasn't cold outside, but the jacket made him feel safer, like a thin shield between him and everything that had once made him shrink away. The streets were empty when he stepped out. Morning light spread over the buildings, soft and pale. He walked without rushing, his steps slow but steady. People would soon fill the sidewalks, going to shops and hurrying to work. But for now it was quiet. He liked it that way. The quiet allowed him to think without pressure. He found himself heading toward the community hall again. He didn't fully understand why he felt drawn back. But the piano lived there, and the piano felt like the only place he could breathe. It had become the one corner of the world where he didn't feel judged or misunderstood. When he reached the building, he paused at the door. The memory of that night, the laughter, the whispers rose in his mind. But then the memory of the stranger's voice softened it. "You shouldn't hide that," they had said. The words carried him forward. Inside the hall, everything was quiet. His footsteps echoed faintly as he walked toward the piano. He sat on the bench and lifted the lid. He let his fingers rest on the keys but didn't play yet. Instead, he closed his eyes and breathed slowly. He thought of all the years he had avoided playing in front of people. How many times had he walked past pianos, afraid to touch them because someone might laugh or misunderstand him? How many times had he held music inside his chest like a secret he wasn't allowed to share? He touched the keys gently, letting a soft note float into the room. It made him feel alive in a way he had almost forgotten. He played another note, then another, until a simple melody formed. He didn't think about perfection, didn't think about what others would say. He just played. The sound filled the room slowly, wrapping around the empty chairs and wooden walls. Every note felt like a small release, like a breath he'd been holding far too long. He allowed the music to grow, not loud, but warm. It felt honest. It felt like the truth he had never been able to speak. He was so lost in the melody that he didn't hear the door open. He didn't notice the soft footsteps. He only noticed when a quiet voice said, "You came back." He stopped playing and turned. The same person from the night before stood a few feet away, holding a notebook in their hand. Their eyes carried that same gentle calm, that same understanding that had startled him the night before. He stared at them, unsure what to do or say. "I didn't mean to interrupt," they said softly. "I just heard the music again." He looked down at his hands on the keys, then back at the person. There was no fear in their expression, no judgment, no discomfort, only a quiet appreciation. "Can I sit?" they asked. He nodded. They took a chair from the side of the room and placed it a short distance away, not too close, not too far. Then they sat, their notebook resting on their lap. He hesitated, unsure if he should continue playing. "You don't have to," the person said gently. "But if you want to, I'd like to listen." He swallowed hard. The idea of playing while someone watched him used to terrify him. But this person didn't feel threatening. They didn't stare the way others did. They didn't whisper. They didn't treat him like he was strange. He took a breath and placed his hands on the keys again. This time, he played a tune he hadn't touched for years. It was a piece he used to play when he needed comfort. Something soft and slow. As the melody flowed, he felt the tension in his shoulders fade. The stranger closed their eyes, listening with full attention. The room felt different now. Not empty, not heavy, just peaceful. When he finished, silence settled between them again. "That was beautiful," the person whispered. He looked down, unable to hold their gaze for long. Compliments still felt unfamiliar, almost fragile. "You know," they continued, "music is a kind of honesty. Most people don't understand that. They only hear what they expect. But your music, it feels real." He didn't know how to respond. He only stared at the keys. The person leaned forward just slightly, careful not to overwhelm him. "What happened the other night, when people walked away? That wasn't your fault." He stiffened. "They didn't understand you," the person said. "But that doesn't make you wrong, or broken, or anything they tried to make you feel." His throat tightened. For years, he had carried those labels like heavy chains, strange, odd, unstable. Words tossed around him as if he couldn't hear them. "You have something special," the person said. "Don't hide it." He took a shaky breath, the weight in his chest lifting slightly. No one had ever spoken to him like this, calm, kind, without pity. They stood from their chair slowly. "I should go," they said softly, "but I hope I hear you play again." He looked up sharply, surprised. The person smiled. "Only if you want to, of course." He nodded, his voice too tight to speak. They gave him one last warm look and walked toward the exit. Before they reached the door, he found his voice. "Thank you," he whispered. They turned, their smile growing just a little. "You're welcome." Then they left. He sat there for a long moment, staring at the empty doorway. Something inside him had changed again, something deeper. For the first time in years, he felt like maybe he wasn't as alone as he thought. He placed his hands on the piano once more. This time when he played, the melody was stronger, steadier. It carried hope. It carried quiet courage. And as the room filled with music again, he realized he wasn't just playing to escape. He was playing because he finally wanted to be heard. The hall was still filling with soft echoes of applause long after he finished playing. Yet he stood there quietly, almost unsure what to do with all the attention. The moment felt unreal to him. Only a while ago, people had turned away from him, whispering things that made him shrink inside. Now they looked at him with wide eyes, some with tears, some smiling like they had just witnessed something rare. He didn't know how to handle that mix of emotions, but he tried to stay calm, breathing slowly as he took in everything around him. He stepped away from the piano and walked toward a corner of the stage, not because he wanted to hide, but because he needed a moment to understand what had just happened. His mind kept replaying the way the keys felt under his fingers, the way the room had fallen silent, the way every note seemed to settle into the hearts of the people listening. He never thought a crowd would feel something from him. He never even thought they would give him a chance. As he sat down on a small wooden chair near the curtains, one of the event organizers approached him. The man didn't speak right away. He simply stood there, trying to choose the right words. When he finally did speak, his voice was softer than before, almost apologetic. He said he hadn't expected someone who came in looking lost, wearing worn-out clothes, to play with such depth. He said he was sorry for judging him so quickly. The young man didn't know what to say in return. He wasn't angry, and he wasn't the type to demand respect. He simply nodded, grateful that the man at least understood now. Understanding mattered more to him than apologies. He knew how people saw him when they first looked at him. He knew his quiet nature and strange habits made others uncomfortable. But he also knew that music was the only place where he felt normal, calm, and whole. Soon, a small group of people began walking toward him. Some were students from the music program. Some were parents who had brought their children to watch the event. And a few were just random guests who had been passing by. They all wanted to talk to him. Some wanted to ask where he learned to play. Others wanted to thank him for making their day. A few simply wanted to shake his hand. It was overwhelming at first, but he tried his best to smile and respond. One little boy stood behind the others, holding an old notebook. He walked carefully toward the young man and asked him to sign a page. The boy's mother explained that her son loved music, but often felt discouraged because he didn't look or act like the other kids in his class. She said that watching him play had given her son hope. The young man took the notebook, signed his name slowly, and handed it back. For a moment, he felt something warm inside, like his music had a purpose beyond himself. The room began emptying as the event came to an end, but a few people stayed behind, watching him as if waiting for something else. One woman finally stepped forward and asked if he could play one more piece. He hesitated, unsure if his hands would respond after such an emotional performance. But the way she asked gently, respectfully made him agree. He walked back to the piano and sat down. The hall was almost quiet now, with only the soft hum of air passing through the vents. He let his fingers rest on the keys for a moment, taking in the stillness. Then he began to play a piece he had never learned from anyone. It was something he created years ago when he had felt alone and forgotten. It was a piece shaped by his own life, slow at the start, heavy in the middle, and light at the end. As he played, he didn't think about the crowd, or the people who once walked away, or the hurtful things they had said. He wasn't thinking about being judged or praised. He wasn't trying to prove anything. He was simply letting his emotions speak in the only language he understood fully. And the small group of people who stayed behind listened with their whole hearts. When he finished, no one clapped, not because they didn't like it, but because they were too moved to respond right away. After a long moment, a soft wave of applause filled the room, slow and warm. He closed the piano lid gently, feeling peaceful. The event organizer approached him again and asked if he would like to join their music program, even if only as a guest player. It wasn't a job offer or anything official, but it was something he had never imagined a door opening for him. The young man thought for a moment, then nodded. He wasn't sure where life would take him next, but he knew this moment mattered. As he walked out of the hall, the evening air felt cool on his skin. He carried no trophies, no certificates, nothing that people usually chase at events like this. But he carried something else, a sense of worth that he hadn't felt in a long time. The people who once looked at him with doubt now looked at him with respect. And while he didn't need their approval, it felt good to know they finally saw who he really was. He took slow steps down the quiet street, hands in his pockets, the sound of the piano still echoing somewhere inside him. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but he felt ready for it. Maybe he would return to the hall and play again. Maybe he would help young students who felt like outsiders. Maybe he would travel and share his story. Or maybe he would simply continue playing in small corners of the city, letting music guide him. What he didn't know was that someone had recorded his performance earlier. By the next morning, the video would begin spreading online. People who had never seen him before would watch in awe. Messages would start pouring in from strangers who felt moved by his music. Some would ask how he learned to play. Others would say his performance helped them through a tough day. But for now, he walked quietly, unaware of how his life was about to change. He reached a small bridge overlooking the river and stopped for a moment. The water shimmered under the streetlights as if reflecting the emotions he carried. He leaned against the railing and let the breeze brush past him. He thought about everything: his struggles, the way people misjudged him, the loneliness he had felt for so long. And then he thought about the sound of the applause, the look in people's eyes, the little boy with the notebook. These were memories he would carry forever. He whispered a soft thank you to the night sky, not to anyone in particular, but to life itself for giving him one moment where everything made sense. Then he pushed himself away from the railing and continued walking. He didn't need to be famous. He didn't need everyone to understand him. He only needed a chance to express what he held inside. And he had finally done that. Music had spoken for him. Music had shown people the truth about him. And music would continue to guide him wherever he went. And so, with quiet steps and a calm heart, he moved forward into the night, ready for whatever life had planned next. He knew the world could be harsh, people could be quick to judge, and moments of kindness could be rare. But he also knew that sometimes, one honest performance, one moment of truth could change everything. He walked with that belief now, carrying it gently like a small flame inside him, lighting his path one step at a time.